On today's episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, Locked On Cyclone, my man Nick Marovets joins the show to talk about who is Jaden Higgins, who is Jaylin Noel, and how could they impact the Houston Texans year one.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, welcome to this episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your Texans insider and credential media member, John Hickman, holding it down for the Locked On Texan podcast. Thank you for making us a part of your first listen of the day and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast family. We are diving into who are these guys? Who are these guys? Who is Jaden Higgins? Who is Jaylin Noel? Then we end off today's show having what some people may feel like is an uncomfortable conversation about some of the players that are already here in Houston in that wide receiver room. Before we dive into the conversations with my man Nick over from Locked On Cyclones, today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your own personal Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com, Fire TV Locked On to learn more. And without further ado, Nick, let's talk Texans. And as promised, we got my man Nick Marovets from the Locked On Cyclones here to talk the wide receiver duo the Houston Texans picked up over the weekend during the NFL draft. Jaden Higgins, Jaylin Noel, two players that the Houston Texans absolutely needed to fill a position of need, wide receiver. It was starving before those two guys. So, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Actually, I want to point something out really quick. You keep saying the Houston Texans. I think you mean the Houston Cyclones based on what I'm seeing. The amount of guys from Iowa State there right now, it's crazy.
Or Iowa State Texans. Which one we going to roll with, right?
One of the other. Like we got to go Houston Cyclones. I think that's the best
is nice. And if you guys are listening, if you're from Houston, meet us at Cyclone Ananias. How about that? Let's celebrate the Houston Texans. So I want to talk to you about who is Jaden Higgins, right? A lot of come to Nico Collins. I've seen some to Mike Evans, but before we talk about the NFL level version that he could be from a college standpoint, who is Jaden Higgins?
Jaden was kind of the guy for Rocco, especially last year. Two 1,100-yard wide receivers. It's hard to say one guy is like the dude. So I'm not going to take anything away from Noel there, but a little bit of like screw it. Higgins got to be down there somewhere, at some times. And so just a great catch radius option at all times, very quick on his feet for Rocco. They designed obviously a lot of 50-50 balls for him. I want to say he had a ridiculous 50-50 win rate, but it was also like a ridiculous number of targets. And when you're winning, why get away from that? So some people look at that as a negative. I actually think it was just like he could do it. Iowa State wanted to keep going to it. And he was pivotal to that Iowa State offense last year for sure.
Yeah, man. And also looking at that offense for what he was last year, we saw a jump in this game from the year before, from 2023. So what was the jump in his game from year one to year two that allowed him to kind of jump up a lot of people's draft board?
I kind of wonder if some of it was coaching too, with Noah Pauly. I think last year was the year he took over offensive pass game kind of duties there, and then Taylor Mauser kind of stepping into his role as well. You'll notice we're not talking Noel right now, but I believe he had a big increase in like yards per catch through the air or whatever it was. Yeah. So I wonder if part of it was scheme. But 2 years spent at Iowa State, that second year, you're just going to be more comfortable with Rocco, with kind of the building as a whole. I don't know, I've only been doing this since December. Unfortunately, I wasn't dialed in on Higgins, 2 years ago, but I think a lot of it came down to coaching and his ability to adapt in that.
Yeah, so what was it about the offense? You mentioned that they designed a lot of 50-50 plays for him, which speaks to the level of trust that they have in him to win those down the field battles. So I know a lot of people, when they look at him, the comparison again to Nico Collins, a big play receiver. In 2023, he averaged nearly 19 yards per catch. But one of the things that I saw that he worked on coming into this year and throughout the year was just the intermediate passing game, where
Hmm.
he was able to kind of win with creating separation. And you like to see that from a bigger body receiver. Do you think he's more so of a stretch the field, downfield guy, or chain mover? Is he a possession guy, or does he have the potential to be able to do it all?
I think he's a guy who could do it all. I'm never going to put a limit on any Iowa State guy, but realistically, it's where it's getting separation off the line for Higgins. His yak isn't exactly off the charts. Kind of needs the separation. Does have the huge catch radius. I think he only had the 3 drops in the 2 years at Iowa State. But if he can get that separation, he's going to come down with it. If he can't, that's when it becomes a bit of a probability. And I wonder at the pros, where does he sit? Is he in the slot consistently? Because when you look at the Texans wide receiver room, definitely solid. Like you said, a little bit starving, but there's some names there for sure. And then obviously Noel is going to be competing for those spots as well. So I wonder where he'll fall, what kind of role he'll play. I think if it's a stretch the field guy, he can come down with those balls, but like looking at his this RAS score here, solid in the 40, solid in the 10, but in the mid range there, it did drop out down to a yellow, which I don't know what a yellow is, to be completely honest. I just know that it's not as good as green. So I wouldn't put him in the stretch the field category the same way I would with Noel, but still can succeed just about anywhere.
We'll talk about Noah when we come back, but is he ready now? Like that's what Texan fans want to know. Last year, towards the end of the year, Tank Dell goes down, Stephon Diggs goes down, and the guys that they had on their roster, they were just simply not ready to go. Two of those guys, one of which former Cyclone in Xavier Hutchinson and former Crimson Tide Alabama player John Metchie. They were not able to create consistent impact for the offense. So now you look at their first pick in this year's draft. Is he ready to go right now? Like, is there a learning curve that the Houston Texans fans should be prepared for, or do you anticipate him being a guy that can create immediate impact once he steps on the field?
That's a tough one. I hesitate to say immediately that anyone's going to make like a super big impact right away. Week 1, just because the NFL is a totally different game from college. But if anyone could do it, Higgins is, big body. It's not going to be a huge jump in size necessarily from the Big 12 to the NFL. I think he's capable of doing that. But like I said, it's just a totally different game. So I wouldn't be too surprised as a Texans fan if it takes a little bit. I'll throw this in there for you. Obviously, you mentioned Xavier Hutchinson. I believe he went in the 6th round, right? Relatively similar receiver to Higgins, but picked much later in the draft. You got to put a little bit of trust into those front offices in the NFL that they know what they're doing. Higgins, the highest drafted wide receiver in Iowa State history at 34. So they saw something that they liked. I don't have the answers of whether or not he'll be successful right away, but that to me is an indicator that the Texans liked what they saw, wanted to get him off the board before anyone else.
You mentioned that's not too much of a big jump from the Big 12 defenses to the NFL. I have to fight back against that because we see a lot of conversation around Higgins and Noel in a conference that they represented last year. So you look at the Big 12 defenses, they are not the best. But he has 6 games in his career of 110 yards or more in his 2-year span, including a 200-yarder. Does he benefit from a conference that, prioritize offense over defense, or is he a guy that is just good, flat out good?
I think he's flat out good. I don't know how that came out. I meant it more as his size isn't going to suffer as much from the jump, right? Smaller guys like Noel, there's that concern because you go from what the Big 12 is on defense and what they're known for to what the NFL is. It's a big jump. It's a big jump either way, but I think Higgins is more equipped to handle that. Then is it the Big 12 defenses that he was able to feed on, or was he just really solid? I think he was just really solid, and Rocco was kind of feed him the ball. And if you feed anybody, they're going to eat, they're going to grow. I think it was a combination of all those things. But I mean, you can't really deny the Big 12, not the best defense, right? Like not the SEC or the Big 10. Apparently, everyone just wants to talk about how much the Big 12 is little brother. So I'm not going to get into that right now. But there is definitely levels.
Just to build off of that one more time, was there this past year, was there a team or a cornerback that maybe had Higgins' number at some point in the game, or was there a game where he kind of fought through adversity to make big plays down the field to help Iowa offense move the rock and score touchdowns? because again, when I look at the Big 12 defenses, I don't think that there was Kobe Bryant was probably the best cornerback in the Big 12 this past year, and he went undrafted. And I thought that was a shocker. But was there a corner, was there a matchup this year that was a little difficult for Higgins? And if so, how did he overcome that?
I think Higgins was just kind of a solid rock throughout. I don't have the exact stats up, unfortunately, to know off the top of my head. One that comes to mind was against Kansas. Iowa State had a really bad game against Kansas, but Jaden was kind of a little bit of a shining light in that game. It felt like whenever you needed a big play, you could go to Higgins. He wasn't ever really going to blow the top off. Like that wasn't something you were counting on from Higgins. But when you needed to get the ball into the end zone, it was like, let's just throw it Higgins' way and see what happens. Kind of that vibe. And so I guess that speaks to the confidence that he can beat anybody, even if someone's given him trouble, because that's going to happen from time to time. Defenses are going to scheme for players, and obviously corners are going to lock down guys every week across the league. Higgins is going to win almost 50% of the time, even if it is a tougher matchup. Like he's going to find a way. I like Higgins in those 50-50 matchups quite a bit.
Here we go, man. When we come back, we got to talk the other Iowa State Cyclone receiver, a guy that a few of my friends believe down the road, with an expanded role, he can be much more of an X factor for the Houston Texans. So let's dive into Jaylin Noel when we come back. You ever check your bank account and wonder where the heck all did my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, we know Amazon is at your door. Entertainment, yeah, I gotta go see Sinners again. It's easy to lose track, but this is where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app; it's a complete financial control center, command center, where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. It's a one-stop shop for a better future. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even long-term planning goals. Managing money with your partner is also smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LockedOnNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LockedOnNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back here, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. My man Nick, Locked On Cyclones, in the house, kicking in with the Locked On Texans family. So you are bringing our listeners some much needed information. Before we dive into Jaylin, back to Jaden really quick. One area of his game that I really like, and I think that when you compare who he can be, and Nico Collins comes up, I think his red zone ability is where I would give the nod to Higgins because of those 50-50 ball opportunities, but his body control down there in the red zone, I think, is extremely impressive. Was that something that the offense kind of knew this past year, which allowed for him to, make those plays within the 20-yard line?
I think, you look at his size and how big he is, the quickness that he also possesses at that size stands out. And like we talked about already, like the separation factor, just at that size. And then in the red zone, right? So separation and 50-50 balls, that's a perfect recipe for success inside the 20. I don't know how much Iowa State necessarily utilized that. It felt like it was more of the 50-50 balls than anything. A lot of Carson Hansen on the inside, a lot of Rocco Becht. QB sneaks once you get inside the 5 there. I think UCF was a game winner. We definitely used that quite a few times. But the 50-50 ball felt like it stood out more, but that doesn't mean that the quickness isn't there. A little stutter step to the outside slant from Higgins,
Yes.
it's a staple. It's definitely been there.
And I love that part of his game. Also, as a blocker, on a scale
Very
to
big
1 to
blocker.
10, where would you rate him as a blocker? And how do you expect for that, and hype up Houston Texas fans, if you can, to translate to the NFL?
I think that's going to be the biggest part of his game. Matt Campbell talked about it a lot. Obviously, both of these guys, Matt Campbell speaks very highly of, but Higgins in his frame, like we just said, how big he is, that's something that's going to get you on the roster and keep you there, right? So 34 overall pick, you guys know how the NFL works. Like those guys are going to get the nod for sure. But at some point, you got to prove yourself. Is it on special teams? Is it blocking down the field? Whatever it is for Higgins, that blocking down the field factor, it's going to play a role. And when you stay on a team for a while, maybe you're not a number one wide receiver your first year, but you prove yourself through the blocking game. You stay on, you learn from the other wide receivers on roster. You learn from CJ Stroud, who is so good. What does he expect from a wide receiver? Yes, the blocking is going to be huge. Like it from a play-to-play basis, absolutely. But the amount of respect he'll gain in the locker room and what that'll do for his career long-term, I think that's going to be probably the biggest piece to Jayden Higgins' NFL career and his growth. I can't speak highly enough on his run blocking, and I think it translates very, very well.
Yeah, that's an area where Houston Texans under Nick Caley, who's the offensive coordinator now, that's where they want to see their receivers who need to earn those opportunities. Everybody ain't Nico Collins, and so for you to get to that level, you got to earn it. But that brings me over to Jaylin Noel, man. Smaller guy, strong guy, bench pressed over 225 over 20 times. And he's a guy that my first question to you is, and you know, to our lady listeners, don't go nowhere, but does size matter with Noel?
That is an amazing question. I love it. You know, it's not about the size so much as like the height as the weight. You know, I'm not going to get into too many terms here, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He may be a little smaller, but he's got the weight to kind of handle that size. And he's really solid at grabbing the ball. So you want to look at his height and just that's immediately like, okay, he can't go up and get the ball. If you haven't turned on the tape, go back. I think it's North Texas is the team. Iowa State's first game of the season, first play of the season. Not sure why. Rocco Beck hurls the ball into double coverage 50 yards down the field.
And that was a beautiful catch. Beautiful catch.
Smothered. And he comes down with it. So he's able to attack the ball, grab it at the point of attack. I'm not too worried about his size. And I do wonder if the Texans can kind of scheme him open more often than not, but he can go up and get the ball. I'm not too concerned about his size. When you look at his RAS score, 9.75, ridiculously fast, ridiculously quick. I believe I heard that he jumped the highest and farthest out of the wide receivers. I don't know if that's true. I haven't backed that up, but certainly very, very impressive. Literally the only thing on this RAS score against him is height and weight, and I think that's a great sign.
But you also look at a guy that had to find a way to get on the field and be impactful, right? And he's a guy that got better every year. Every year he's gotten better. When I look at his receiving yards, 269, 572, 820. Then his past year, just under 1,200 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 7, 8. And then, right, this is where I want to kind of ask you another question. In the special teams, kick return yards, punt return yards, he got better every year. What is it about his game on special teams that allowed him to be so dangerous? And what is the Houston Texans getting from Noel in that part of his game?
He's quick and he's got vision. You know, you want to talk punt returners, that is the recipe for success. As soon as you get that ball, turning the ball upfield and reading exactly what the coverage team is giving you and navigating those holes. Noel was always, due. You know what they say, he's due. He felt like he was always due. You never knew when he was just going to rip one wide open, and that obviously translates to the wide receiver side of things as well. I feel like the yak for Noel is a little bit actually more promising than Higgins just because of his obviously history with punt returns and I believe kick returns as well, and just how solid he was in that facet of the game, just translating over. He's fast. He's so quick. There's a lot to love about Noel despite the size. A lot of people had him lower on their draft boards. I think this is the biggest steal of the draft. I tweeted, I think I might have to become a Texans fan now because
Come on
you guys
over. Come on
absolutely got steals
jersey
in Higgins and Noel. Okay, now we're talking.
We'll get you a jersey. But look, so you mentioned the quickness, the speed, right? The height may be a knock for some teams, but what he brings makes up for that. Do you see Noel being down the line much more of an X factor? And I want to also add to that question, can he also be an inside-outside guy that creates matchup problems for DBs and linebackers?
Absolutely. The X factor, 1,000%. I think that when Noel is 1,000% looked at as a slot receiver, yes?
Yes. But this is the 2025 modern football NFL.
Right.
So
Right. No, I agree. I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page there because I feel like that's all I've heard is he is going to be a plug into slot when he gets his opportunities. That's where he'll be. Not very many slot receivers have the stretch the field ability that Noel has. And as I mentioned, first play of the season, perfect example of that. It wasn't the only time, but it's a great, it's just an absolutely awesome highlight on top of on top of the example it sets. But I think I've got a 151 in his first 10 of the 40. Ridiculous off the line. He can absolutely create problems up the seam. And then on the outside too, his 4.39 40, yeah, he's going to cause problems whether it be inside or outside. And when you've got a slot guy on the inside who can stretch and doesn't automatically just drop into a zone or come across the field, across the linebacker's face or just behind him, whatever the case is, how they're schemed up, that creates problems for a defense. You can't just scheme them one way and forget about them.
Yeah, he comes off as a guy that I think once he can find a groove in the NFL, you look at a lot of these hollow concepts that the league likes to run. He can hurt a team, hurt a defense on the inside, right? Depending on the matchup, because of that speed and his ability to create separation. But with Higgins being the top guy for the Cyclones, Noel never, he was never number one, like dating back to when Hutch was there. So how was he able to complement the number one guy? How was he able to help the quarterback, right? Find zones, sit in zones, beat defenses. How was he able to complement the offense, in your opinion?
It always helps to have two absolute studs. Like that's just kind of a given. Why have one really good guy when you could have two? So if the teams that we were facing ever wanted to hunker down on Noel, we had Higgins. If they ever wanted to try to lock up Higgins, we had Noel. And then our tight end room was pretty solid. We went through a lot of injuries last year for sure, but that we kind of tried to diversify our game as much as we possibly could. But it was kind of the complementary aspects of each of their games that allowed them to, I think, flourish, right? So you've got Noel can really stretch the field, or Higgins on those comeback routes is really solid. The way they scheme those guys up, one of them was probably going to be open more than half the time, which is why they both had 1,100 yards. Like you just kind of alternate, boom, bam, pow down the field. Then you hand it off to Hanson, touchdown. That was kind of how the season went a little bit with some breakout plays there. And the other thing I want to mention here, because I know we're coming up on time, is Noel wasn't really talked about as a leader. Matt Campbell took time out of his presser this last week when spring ball ended to point out how good of a leader he was. I was overshadowed because of guys like Bo Freeler or DP. I believe he went to Las Vegas. Las Vegas. But Noel was an absolute, just great dude, leader. I think the Texans are getting a really solid, not only player, but dude there. Same with Higgins. I'm not talking down on him, but people look to him because he was kind of that number one, just in size, especially. Don't sleep on Noel and how hard he's going to work, both of them. But film study, meetings, rehab, treatment, day in, day out, first and last out. That's what you're getting in an Iowa State guy.
I love the fact that Nick Haley is getting two guys that he can mold from ground zero, right? And you look at the possibility of Haley being the longevity answer for offensive coordinator here in Houston. You also look at him being able to bring those guys along with him and how they can grow in the NFL. Nick, thank you for stopping by the Locked On Texan podcast. Before you leave, please let our listeners know where they can find you on social media and where they can listen to all of your podcasts.
Yes, sir. Locked On Cyclones. If you're looking to see who the next big Cyclones in the league are going to be, you know where to find me. And then at Nick_Marv is my Twitter. I put out a lot of takes there. Not always the best ones, but certainly what I'm thinking.
Hot takes, cold takes, sports takes. Y'all go check them out.
You got it, brother.
We may need to see you soon, man, but thank you for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. Can't wait.
The NBA playoffs are here. And whether you're a Rockets fan, whether you're a Timberwolves fan, whether you're a fan of the New York Knicks, FanDuel is giving you and all new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Right? And FanDuel is making it easy to bet, right? Betting is easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance at a big win. Don't miss out, okay? Do not miss out. head to fanduel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Don't miss out. Get in on the playoff action, and who knows, you may hit big like Anthony Edwards. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Hey, guys, that was my man Nick over from Locked On Cyclones. He's holding it down, covering all things Iowa State in terms of football, right? And Houston just picked up 2 receivers that we are anticipating, especially Jaden Higgins with their first pick in the 2025 draft. We are anticipating those guys to have a big role for the Houston Texans, right? You look at Higgins and what he'll provide for Houston in terms of support at the Z receiver, becoming Houston's solidified number 2 receiver. And I don't think that they're going to give it to him, right? This is a team that has preached all offseason the C word that some of us don't want to hear. Competition, right? Not that other C word. Competition. So I do look at the guys that are already on the roster, right? But when I look at those guys, I have to ask myself, is it time for the uncomfortable conversations? Right? And I want to shout out to my boy, Coach Barnes, because we talk about this all the time. In the absence of Nico Collins, Houston needed guys to step up. And I also think when we look at the players that went down last year and how the guys that were supposed to come into those positions, next man up, those guys were not able to really give Houston the support that they needed, especially down the stretch when there was no Stephon, there was no Tank Dell, and Nico was getting back into his groove. It's time to have the conversation around John Metchie and Xavier Hutchinson, right? In the absence of Nico Collins, 5 games for John Metchie, 12 targets, 8 catches, 103 yards. Excuse me. In the absence of Nico Collins, again, 5 games for Xavier Hutchinson, 11 targets, 4 catches, 36 yards. When Tank Dell went down for Hutchinson, 6 targets, 3 catches, 26 yards in the playoffs, 86 yards in 2 games, 7 targets, 5 catches. For Metchie, 24 targets, 125 yards on 13 catches once Tank Dell went down. Guys, those numbers are not going to get it done. And I think when we look at the Houston Texans, look at this. They only drafted 1 offensive lineman. Why? This whole offseason, Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, they've alluded to the fact that after their free agency, they were comfortable with the direction of the offensive line. They were comfortable with the players in that room because they are comfortable with the coaching and the revised scheme that we're going to see here in Houston with Nick Caley calling plays. They are comfortable. Now, can that comfortableness look like complacency? And will it be, and down the line, will it be something that Houston maybe overlooked? Maybe. But they like the guys that they brought in the offseason. They like Cam Robinson. Gave him a 1-year, $14 million deal. They like the addition of Trent Brown. They like the addition of Tomlinson and Ingram. They also like the guys that will be benefiting from year 1 under Cole Popovich and the young guys. Jared Patterson, Juice Scruggs, Blake Fisher, Titus Howard coming back, who I think will solidify their left guard position. So that's a worry that we don't need to have. They like those guys. They only wanted to invest into 1 offensive lineman in this draft. They got 2 guys. They got 2 guys that mirror. One guy that mirrors Nico Collins. The other guy you can look at maybe mirroring Christian Kirk at his peak, what Jaylin Noel can do, and a special teamer player. Big 12 special teamer of the year type of guy, right? I think that goes and reflects directly to the lack of confidence they have in guys on the back end of this wide receiver room. And let's be honest, until they prove it in the NFL, both Jaden Higgins and Jaylin Noel, those guys will be on the back end of their wide receiver room. The only guys with real proof that they can be explosive and make plays, especially when healthy, on this roster right now, Nico and Kirk. So the competition will be there. But if those guys were able to provide Houston any type of support at all, once Tank Dell went down, once Stephon Diggs went down, once Nico Collins went down for 5 games, I think we will look at the draft a little bit differently. I think we would have still saw Houston go out there and draft a receiver, maybe with their first pick, but they brought in two guys, two replica type of guys. The uncomfortable conversation that we need to have right now is the time clock on John Metchie and Xavier Hutchinson. I think Xavier Hutchinson right now is the odd man out. He was supposed to be the big body receiver that can consistently make plays downfield. He's not that for Houston. Had a flash here and there in 2 seasons, but not enough. John Metchie may very well be the 5th option now for Houston. And it's not like Houston didn't give him the opportunity to prove himself, because when Tank Dell went down against Kansas City in the 2 playoff games, you're looking at 3 full games for John Metchie, 24 targets. Hutch only got 6, a bump of 18 more targets for John Metchie. 24, 125 on 13 catches. So you look at John Metchie potentially fighting for Braxton Berrios' spot. Houston is in a position right now where, and we said it all off season here on this show, they are learning from their past mistakes. Loyalty to guys and coaches, I think, was one of them. And the uncomfortable conversation is right now for 2 young men, talented young men, right? They made it to the NFL. 2 guys that had some great seasons in college, may not be working out for them right now with the Houston Texans. And I would not be shocked if by the time we get through midway during training camp, we get a couple of preseason games in, Houston may look at one of those guys as trade targets, and one of those guys may very well be John Metchie, who Houston traded up for a couple of seasons ago. And another uncomfortable conversation. We talk about the injury for Tank Dell, but we really don't talk about the severity of it. We really don't talk about Tank Dell and him having to come back already from an injury, and also what he sustained last offseason, and also tearing his ACL, MCL, LCL, meniscus, dislocated knee. So the timeline that we realistically have to look at is very unclear. This isn't 10 to 15 years ago with ACL injuries where it takes 1.5 years, 2 years to come back, right? But the realistic timeline for Tank Dell is, when does he come back? When does he get comfortable? When does he get back to himself? So another uncomfortable conversation to have down the road really is how much of Jaylin Noel's impact, and where do they view him as an impact special team player, as a guy that can find a role and dominate a role in the slot if he does what he did in college and the NFL, a guy you can get creative with, a 4.3 40 guy who can make plays down the field, can create the separation, and is also dangerous in the open field, gets that yak yard. How much of his impact will we see in year 1 and part of year 2, and getting that chemistry with CJ Stroud and being there to learn on the go with Nick Caley on the field? Will that play into Tank Dell's future with the Houston Texans? Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the LockedOn Texans podcast. Please be sure to do a few things. Subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gents, Bulls on parade. Peace.